Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 71. A Plate of Rice. After solving these problems, Marin waved his hand, wanting Aben to leave, but Aben did not move. Anything else? Marin was a little confused. Yes, sir, Governor George asked me to bring you some gifts. Oh, what is it? Marin became interested. It's 5 bags of food for the Indians, and 1 bag of ginger. Aben didn't know rice, so he just used food for the Indians instead. When the guards brought in 5 bags of rice, Marin opened the bag and was immediately excited. Big rice. Most people may not understand Marin's excitement now. You know, Marin hasn't eaten rice since he traveled through time. It has been 8 years now. So, after 8 years, Marin was actually excited to see the rice he ate every day in his previous life. Quick! Tell the kitchen to prepare a pot to cook rice. I want to eat rice today. After saying that, Marin left the somewhat dazed Aben and ran to the kitchen to personally direct the cooking. The chefs were all native North Germans, so naturally no one had ever seen rice or knew how to cook rice. So Marin took command in the kitchen. Half an hour later, using a cooking pot, Marin finally cooked the first pot of rice after crossing. At the same time, the chefs also fried 2 dishes for Marin to eat with rice. Marin held up the silver plate with trembling hands. There was no bowl for rice, nor porcelain, and put a spoonful of rice into his mouth with a spoon. Huh? No. It doesn't taste like rice. Marin frowned. Marin didn't look carefully before and didn't recognize the rice. In fact, it was all relatively long and thin indica rice. The rice that Ma Lin is talking about is rice in a narrow sense, which is actually called japonica rice, which is a common rice variety in the north and central China. It has a soft and glutinous taste, which is very popular with Ma Lin. Rice in a broad sense also includes indica rice. Ma Lin's hometown is in the Jianghuai area north of the Yangtze River, where people prefer to eat japonica rice. When he was a child, his family also planted hybrid rice developed by Mr. Yuan, but that rice was high-yielding but not very delicious. Therefore, after the family conditions improved, no one in Ma Lin's hometown planted it, and they all switched to japonica rice. Although the yield is not as good as hybrid rice, the taste is more popular. The bowl of rice that Ma Lin ate was a bit like the hybrid rice that he didn't like to eat, not soft and glutinous enough. However, because indica rice is not sticky enough, it is the best choice for fried rice. Because the rice grains of indica rice do not stick together, it is more suitable for stir-frying. And japonica rice is more suitable for steaming and boiling. In fact, japonica rice is only grown in the area north of the Yangtze River. In the Jiangnan region, indica rice is mostly grown. Because indica rice is heat-resistant. Even in tropical areas, indica rice is grown. The legendary Kampa rice, native to southern Vietnam, is also an indica rice. There is no japonica rice in India, so the rice introduced from India naturally does not have the japonica rice that Marin likes to eat. Even if japonica rice seeds are introduced, they can only be grown in temperate zones, such as North America, and are not suitable for tropical areas such as Grenada. Indica white rice is obviously not to Marin's taste, but Marin hasn't eaten rice for 8 years. So, he wolfed down the big plate of indica rice quickly. After eating, it seemed that it was not enough. He was so excited that he drove the chef away and fried a plate of the legendary egg fried rice with the remaining indica rice in the pot. Indica rice is not sticky, so it is really suitable for making fried rice. Unlike japonica rice, it often sticks to the pan. Marin easily fried a plate of egg fried rice with butter, indica rice and eggs, as well as onions and other ingredients, and then ate it again, feeling very satisfied. So he told the chef not to eat black bread in the next few days. In addition to eating bread for breakfast, he would eat egg fried rice for lunch and dinner. The chef was also a little confused. Although they watched the whole process, they had not tried it, so they were still unsure. So they plucked up the courage to ask Marin for attention. But are there any other points to pay attention to when cooking rice? Marin only told them that the rice should not be burnt or undercooked. Egg fried rice is not difficult. With the chef's several years of cooking experience, it should not be difficult to make. As for cooking, this is easy, let them try a few more times. Anyway, this time Aben brought 500 pounds of indica rice, and only 1 or 2 pounds of rice are needed for cooking at a time, which is enough for them to cook many times. When Marin returned to the office area with his full stomach, he found that Aben was still standing there stupidly, waiting for instructions. Why are you still here? Marin asked in surprise. It has been more than an hour since he left the office, and this silly boy has not left yet. It's past lunchtime. You didn't let me go. Aben said aggrievedly. Marin blushed a little. He remembered that he was busy cooking and forgot to ask Aben to go back. Well. Aben, you did a good job this time, I'm very happy. Next time you go to Grenada Island, remember to tell old George that I like this rice. Rice, ask them to send more, understand? I'm glad you like it. I will definitely bring more back next time. Seeing Marin happy, Aben's face was also full of red, and his bald head was a little shiny. Well, before you leave, go to Kohler to collect the reward of 100 gold coins. Come, I'll write you a note. Marin held his bloated stomach, found a piece of paper, wrote a note, and asked Aben to go to Kohler to collect the reward of 100 gold coins. Aben was also very happy about the reward. Although it is not too much, it is definitely a lot of money for a small captain like Aben who has not yet obtained a title. You know, as a captain, his salary is 3 times that of an ordinary person, but it is only 36 gold coins a year. Including the sailing reward, it is only about 50 gold coins a year. 100 gold coins are equivalent to his salary for 2 years. More importantly, this kind of reward is not only an increase in material wealth, but also an honor. Because every time you reward money, you must also issue a certificate. This kind of parchment certificate can be hung at home as a show. This is also a kind of bad taste of Marin. The merits of some of his men are not enough to be granted a title and land. But without a title and land, how can you go out and show off? So, Marin thought of the common certificates in school in his previous life. Parchment certificates are more durable than paper certificates. Hanging them at home is also a way to show off. Moreover, there are signatures of Marin or Geoffrey on them, which are very authoritative. The certificate that Aben got this time, proving that he had been awarded, was certified by Kohler and signed by Prime Minister Geoffrey himself. He could hang it up to show off, which was definitely a face-saving thing. Moreover, Marin's rewards were generally in gold coins, unlike the school in his previous life, which rewarded worthless things such as pencils and notebooks. Certificates can fool even people in the 20th century. It seems that they can no longer fool ordinary people in the 21st century, even silk banners can't, but they are still very impressive for fooling the European people in the late Middle Ages. For example, after Aben got the certificate signed by Geoffrey, he was as happy as a child, and he even showed it to acquaintances on purpose. Damn, why does he look so much like the idiot he was when he first got the Progress Award in his previous life? Marin, who came out to get some fresh air, saw Aben showing off his sheepskin certificate to his acquaintances, and suddenly remembered his own silly years in his previous life. Chapter 72 Whale Meat, Whale Oil, and Soybeans. The ship that went to and from Grenada took the route westward from the south of the Canary Islands, but on the return trip, it went north along the Windward Islands, first arriving at Amerigo Island and Cape Breton Island, and then following the North Atlantic Current and returning to Europe. Therefore, the governor of Cape Breton Island, Garland, and the governor of the 2 islands, Terra, knew that Aben's ship brought rice and ginger back to Europe. But they were still young, and naturally not as experienced as old George. Therefore, they were taken the lead by old George to show off their merits. But they were not fools, and they always had to send something back to Europe to show their merits. It happened that the autumn harvest had just passed, and not long after Aben's ship passed, Terra also asked the 2 islands to use a cog sailing ship for their own use, loaded with several bags of harvested soybeans, some pickled whale meat and boiled whale oil, ready to be sent back to Europe. The governor of Cape Breton Island, Garland, naturally could not fall behind, so he also ordered the only cog sailing ship on Cape Breton Island used to travel to and from Europe to be filled with rye and salted fish, intending to return to Europe with the ship of the 2 islands. Cape Breton Island is just off Newfoundland Island, and there are so many marine fish here. Therefore, when the fishermen sent by Marin adapted to the sea conditions here, they caught so many fish that they could not eat them all. Moreover, whether it is Cape Breton Island or the 2 islands, there are many large trees that have been cut down for land reclamation on the island. Those oaks, of course, keep the trunk as wood. But those scraps, as well as wood of other tree species, directly become fuel. Whether it is Garland or Terra, they are Marin's confidants. They naturally know that Marin made his fortune by boiling salt. So, they also used these woods to set up a big pot on the seashore and started boiling salt. Similarly, the same is true in Grenada. Therefore, the 3 colonies have sufficient firewood and salt. It is not painful to pickle salted fish. Garland, who knew that there were coal mines in North Sydney, north of Sydney Bay, even planned to use the local coal mines to boil salt on a large scale. To this end, Garland made a report and applied to Marin to build a large-scale salt boiling base on the seashore near the North Sydney coal mine. This report will also be sent back to Europe with the ship. Moreover, Garland found that there were many whales near Cape Breton Island. After all, whales survive by eating small fish. In the Newfoundland fishing grounds, where there are so many small fish, it would be strange if there were no whales. Therefore, Garland also planned to apply for a few whale hunters from Amerigo Island to come over and engage in whaling on Cape Breton Island. The ship sent by Terra was filled with super large pieces of pickled whale meat and large barrels of whale oil, which made Garland envious. Although there is no shortage of fish on Cape Breton Island, there is a shortage of oil. Although whale oil cannot be eaten directly, it is also good for lighting. Whether it is an oil lamp or a torch, adding some whale oil is perfect. Although the fishermen on Cape Breton Island could scrape some oil from some small fish, it was too little. Unlike Amerigo Island, where 60 barrels of whale oil were boiled. This time, Terra directly had 50 barrels of boiled whale oil loaded and sent back to Europe. These whale oils were packed in large 100-liter wooden barrels, and each barrel of whale oil weighed about 200 pounds. 50 barrels were equivalent to 10,000 pounds of whale oil. It can be imagined that Terra would definitely be commended for sending so much whale oil back this time. The jealous Garland also wanted to apply to Marin for whaling in the waters near Cape Breton Island. Because the number of whales here is not less than that near Amerigo Island, and there are even more. However, Marin sent all the 30 specially trained whalers to Amerigo Island. On Cape Breton Island, there are only ordinary fishermen, and no warriors who can hunt whales. Therefore, he hoped that Marin could dispatch 2 groups, 12 people, of whale hunters to start whaling in the waters near Cape Breton Island. The 2 ships set out from Sydney Harbour on Cape Breton Island, and it took more than a month to cross the Atlantic Ocean and arrive at Emden Harbour. After all, returning from North America to Europe is a smooth journey, so there is no reason not to be fast. Just half a month after the ship on Grenada Island, the ships from the 2 islands of North America and Cape Breton Island also arrived at Emden Harbour. When Marin saw the huge chunks of whale meat and barrels of whale oil, he was also very happy. Marin tasted the chunks of whale meat and found that it was not bad, almost like beef. In fact, Marin didn't know that this was the mink whale meat that Terra specially selected. Other types of whale meat have a fishy smell, and it is not delicious to eat directly. Unless, add seasoning to cover up the smell. Although Terra is not very smart, he still knows how to please his young master. Therefore, on the island of Amerigo, he distributed other types of whale meat that were not so tasty to the immigrants. Most of the most delicious mink whale meat was pickled, packed and sent back to the mainland for Marin to eat. These pickled super large pieces of mink whale meat made Marin and his nobles enjoy a whale meat feast. That night, Marin entertained many of his subordinates in Auric and tasted a full set of whale meat feasts such as fried, deep-fried, stir-fried, boiled and grilled. However, because it was pickled, it was not very delicious. But anyway, whale meat is also a rare delicacy that made everyone satisfied. As for the whale oil, part of it was sent to the warehouse to supply the court and various nobles as lamp oil. Another part was sent to make soap. The main raw materials for soap are oil and alkali. Marin now has a lot of soda ash imported from Egypt, and with these whale oils, he can make a large amount of low-cost soap. Previously, European soaps were made from soda ash extracted from wood ash and animal fats, which were very expensive. After all, animal fats are also a kind of food. Whether it is beef tallow or sheep fat, they are very popular foods. Especially in this era of lack of oil and water, oil is a very replenishing food. Therefore, the cost of traditional soap making is also very high. If Marin uses whale oil to make soap, the cost will be greatly reduced. After all, the cost of whale oil is very low, and it only requires the labor of whalers. Unlike raising livestock, it takes a lot of time to raise cattle and sheep. Only after raising them can you get a little oil. And whale oil is obtained in barrels. A whale can get several barrels of whale oil. This cost is simply incomparable. In addition, the cost of importing natural soda ash from Egypt is much lower than extracting soda ash from wood ash. Therefore, the cost of making soap with whale oil and Egyptian natural soda ash is only about a fraction of the traditional soap making. As for those salted fish and rye, Marin doesn't care too much. Because there are a lot of those things in Europe. Marin was very excited by the bags of soybeans sent from Amerigo Island. Because this proved that Indian soybeans can also be well grown in temperate regions. Terra said in the report that the germination rate of these Indian soybeans was not high when they were planted. Probably, that batch of soybeans was not adapted to the temperate climate of North America. Therefore, the germination rate was no more than 60%. However, most of these sprouted soybeans grew well later. Although the yield per mu was only £100, Marin was very happy. After all, the yield per mu was only £100 this time, and a big reason was that many soybeans did not germinate. If Terra selects the second generation of soybeans with large and full grains as seeds to continue planting next year, it should be more adapted to the local climate. After all, those large and full soybeans are grown from plants that are very adapted to the local climate. Whale meat, whale oil and soybeans are what Marin is most satisfied with this time. Speaking of which, these three things all come from Terra's Amerigo Island. Garland didn't get any prizes, but there was nothing he could do about it. As for Garland's application to transfer 2 teams of whale hunters to Cape Breton Island, Marin thought about it and agreed. After all, the number of whales in the Newfoundland fishing grounds is not less than that in Amerigo Island, and there are even more. In the future, Marin plans to immigrate more fishermen there, and select young and brave fishermen to learn whaling and expand the scale of whaling. There are so many whales in this era, and they have not experienced the crazy hunting of humans. Therefore, even if Marin expands the scale of whaling, it will not have much impact on the number of whales. However, killing those whales has a great impact on Marin. Because he can get a lot of whale meat and whale oil. In addition, Marin also affirmed Garland's proposal to apply for a large-scale salt boiling field near the North Sydney coal mine. In fact, Marin is worried that his secret of boiling salt with coal will be discovered. The last time hundreds of Danish warships besieged Emden, Marin was scared. He was not afraid of the combat effectiveness of the Danish fleet, but he was afraid that they would run to the salt boiling center hidden on Baltrum Island, discover Marin's secrets, and sabotage. So, Marin was so straightforward last time. After all, coal boiling salt is the lifeline of Marin's economy. Although food also makes money, Marin is unwilling to sell food for money. Because he needs food to feed immigrants. Without selling grain, selling salt became Marin's main economic lifeline. Garland's suggestion suddenly gave Marin a new idea: should the salt-making center be moved to Cape Breton Island? You know, there is a large coal mine on Cape Breton Island, not far from the sea. If enough coal miners are arranged to go there and the mine coal is directly pulled to the seaside to make salt, it would be very convenient. Moreover, there will be absolutely no outsiders to spy. Because before the gold and silver in America became famous in Europe, America was a wild land in the eyes of Europeans, and they would only come here if they were kicked in the head by a donkey. Besides, this place is not far from Europe, and it is also quick and convenient to transport salt back to Europe by ship. The most important thing is to keep it confidential to the greatest extent. Chapter 73, The Troublesome Preparation of Pre-War Materials. The war will start in February next year, and it will be a large-scale expedition of 20,000 people. Therefore, Marin must be fully prepared for the preparation of supplies. Otherwise, once the supply of materials is replenished, there will be a big mess. It just so happens that there are tens of thousands of militiamen in East Frisia, who have served as militiamen in the Saxon invasion army, so Marin ordered to gather these militiamen, conduct discipline training, and let them be responsible for the transportation of supplies. Before leaving for Lübeck, Schwartz and Stade were responsible for the training of 5,000 recruits. At the same time, after the autumn harvest, Old Hoffman also led 7,000 militiamen from all over the country and the 5,000 recruits to start military training. According to the plan, after Marin led the main force to quickly capture the earldom of Oldenburg, he would withdraw some troops from the militia to garrison Oldenburg and monitor the members of the Oldenburg family. Moreover, the 2 small towns of Jever will also be attacked by Adler. After conquering Jever, Adler had to lead troops to station in Oldenburg to ensure safety. As for Marin, he personally led 10,000 troops to the east to join another 10,000 troops and the troops of Lübeck and Hamburg, and served as the commander-in-chief of the army, leading 30,000 troops to the north to attack the Duchy of Schleswig and the Jutland Peninsula. Because the national militia was mobilized, Marin was afraid that the people of the earldom of Oldenburg would get the news. Therefore, he pulled the recruits and militia to the central region for training. In addition, the exchanges with the earldom of Oldenburg were closed, and merchants were prohibited from entering the country to avoid being spotted by the merchants who came and went, which would arouse the vigilance of the earldom of Oldenburg. Fortunately, there were few exchanges between countries in this era. Serfs were confined to the manor and could not go out at will. Only merchants, nobles, beggars, mercenaries and other special professionals walked freely on the European continent. Among them, merchants had the strongest mobility and the largest scale. However, the merchants of the earldom of East Frisia basically belonged to the Chamber of Commerce established by Marin through Kohler. In other words, the merchants in East Frisia are actually Marin's men. Foreign merchants who came to East Frisia were squeezed out by them by various means. Therefore, there are actually very few foreign merchants in the East Frisian county. Even if the eastern border is blocked, the impact on business can be ignored. Therefore, Marin's army can train safely in the country without worrying about being discovered by passing merchants from other countries. As for the reason for blocking the eastern border, it is also very simple. I was ceded land, I was upset, and I broke off diplomatic relations with you. In the Auric Palace, Marin was discussing the issue of logistics supply with Prime Minister Geoffrey, Vice Prime Minister Hayter, Finance Minister Kohler and other civilian officials. Unlike the last time to resist the invasion of the Saxon army, although tens of thousands of troops were mobilized last time, it was very convenient to supply because it was actually fighting in the country. Therefore, not too many civilians are needed. But this time, Marin needs to take 20,000 troops and 10,000 civilians on an expedition, and too much preparation is needed. Apart from anything else, the food alone is an astonishing number. Rations for 30,000 people. Because of the long journey, the soldiers consumed a lot of physical energy and must have eaten more than usual. Therefore, Marin arranged 3 pounds of rye every day for the soldiers to eat freely. Fortunately, Marin has stored a lot of food in recent years and has only sold food once, not counting the grain sold by other nobles. Therefore, the food reserves are sufficient for the soldiers to eat freely. But it is not enough to bring rye alone. After all, the soldiers do not know how to make bread. Therefore, Marin ordered that male bakers across the country were also recruited to go to war with the army. As for the domestic bread supply, it will be temporarily handed over to women. After all, almost everyone in this era can make black bread, but they are not the spoiled girls who can't do anything in Marin's previous life. For this reason, Marin also transferred some officers to manage and train the bakers. But what makes Marin depressed is that half of the thousands of bakers recruited are unqualified and not suitable for long-distance expeditions. Because these people are either old or too fat and can't walk the original way. After all, in this era, bakers can still eat their fill. Those with big heads and thick necks are either nobles or cooks. Therefore, those fat bakers who are fat and exhausted after walking a few miles cannot go with the army. In this way, Marin can only take 500 bakers with him to make bread for the soldiers. As for the transportation of food, Marin is now using ships to transport large quantities of rye from Emden to Hamburg for storage. In this way, the civilians don't have to transport food to Hamburg by land. After all, transporting food by land is much more troublesome than transporting food by sea, and it consumes more manpower. At that time, the civilians only need to bring enough military rations from the mainland to Hamburg. After arriving in Hamburg, the food that was transported here before can be used. In addition to the food for 30,000 people, Marin also needs to prepare food for more than 5,000 horses. Moreover, this must be separated from the food for people. Because horses eat oats. This time, Marin planned to mobilize all the horses in the country. In addition to the foals and old horses, a total of 5,035 strong horses were registered. Among them, a small number were war horses, and most of the rest were draft horses. After Marin bought more than 20,000 cattle from Poland, the farming tasks in the country were taken over by cattle. These horses were also used for transportation and breeding. Near Auric, Marin also gathered a large number of horses and donkeys to breed mules. Although there are more than 5,000 horses, they are much more than people. Fortunately, horses do not eat purely grain, they can also eat grass. But even so, the amount of oats that need to be carried is no less than the rye that people eat. Marin was a little confused. He didn't expect that an expedition would need to consider so much. Moreover, this is just a food problem. In addition, the soldiers' clothes, shoes, tent fabrics and sharp wooden stakes needed for camping were also transported with the army, which was very troublesome. Fortunately, Marin had promoted the weaving of straw sandals in the army long before, and wearing straw sandals is also very suitable for long-distance treks. The most important thing is that it is cheap. It is easy to wear out shoes after a long trek. If you change to the leather shoes currently popular in Europe, how high is the cost? And the cheap wooden-soled shoes are not suitable for long-distance treks at all, otherwise they are easy to break. Therefore, cheap and practical straw sandals are the best choice. At the same time, using straw sandals can also save a lot of expenses. After all, the cost of straw sandals is too low, and you can weave them by pulling some grass everywhere. The only cost is about labor. But labor is so worthless these days. As for the soldiers' clothing, Marin did not issue a full set. After all, these troops are mercenaries, not conscripts. Therefore, Marin only gave each of them a white vest with a very square black cross drawn on it with black ink, which saves a lot of fabric. As for the clothes inside, the soldiers solve it themselves. Of course, Marin will prepare breastplate armor and helmets with movable masks for the soldiers standing in the first 3 rows. After all, the soldiers in the first 3 rows are the most dangerous and the most elite, and Marin needs to ensure their safety. In addition to food and clothing, Marin also arranged for Kohler to purchase a large amount of bacon and sausages that are easy to preserve, so that they can be carried during marches and supplement the nutrition of the soldiers. In addition, the ammunition required for guns and artillery is also an important part of transportation. For this reason, Kohler also sent a ship to Spain to purchase lead blocks. There are many musketeers in the East Frisian army, and the consumption of lead bullets is very high. The main lead-producing areas in Europe are in southern Europe such as Spain and Italy. Marin wants to fight a large-scale battle and needs so much lead, so he can only go to southern Europe to purchase it. In war, casualties are inevitable. Therefore, Marin also needs to prepare enough medicines, gauze and alcohol. For this reason, Marin also asked Kohler to buy a large number of undyed linen, wash it, dry it and pack it. After arriving at the battlefield, boil it and dry it at any time to bandage the wounded soldiers. As for alcohol, it happened that the brewing master who had been sent to invite had brewed a lot of dark beer. Marin moved a lot of dark beer luxuriously and started multiple rounds of distillation in a steamer to obtain the alcohol needed by the soldiers. The aroma of wine emanating from the steaming room made many drunkards drool. But there was no way, that was the alcohol prepared for bandaging the wounded, and no one could have an idea. As for the military medical staff, Marin directly ordered the transfer of the disciples of the court doctors recruited from the Golden Horde, and after teaching them modern medical knowledge, he asked them to carry a large amount of golden wound medicine and follow Marin's army to treat the soldiers at any time. After a whole day of meetings, the material preparations were finally arranged, and Marin was also extremely headache damn, it was really annoying to send troops on a long expedition. There were many things to prepare, and the most important thing was that there were many varieties. It was so complicated that Marin, who had been in meetings for a day, felt a little dizzy. Fortunately, Marin arranged these specific tasks for others, so he didn't have to prepare them himself. Otherwise, he would go crazy. Chapter 74, Big Shield Soldiers. The training of new recruits is very tight because there is too little time. There are still more than 2 months before the expedition, and Marin can only plan to let these 5,000 new recruits learn while fighting. Fortunately, the main Danish army is trapped in Sweden, and the county of Oldenburg is also a scumbag. These new recruits can be allowed to fight and practice with the veterans. Military training is mainly divided into 2 major items. The first item is naturally phalanx training, which is Marin's specialty. Because he is so good at it, the famous Spanish Grand Phalanx is now called Marin Phalanx. For this, Marin was proud for a long time. The second item is siege training and street fighting training, which is mainly practiced in combination with the combat needs of this time. After all, there are more than a dozen large and small cities that need to be conquered in this attack on Denmark. Therefore, necessary siege and street fighting training are also needed. However, for the recruits, the above 2 items are put aside first, so that they can train in formation and distinguish between left and right. Then, the miserable recruits only wore 1 straw sandal and the other foot in socks. It is also because the conditions are good now. When Marin first formed a mercenary team for training, he recruited a bunch of poor people. No one had socks, and they trained barefoot in winter. In order to keep out the cold, Marin had to spread a thick layer of hay on the ground. Now, during military training, Marin's recruits are equipped with woolen socks, which are more cold-proof. In addition, the ground is also padded with hay. Although it is winter, there is no fear of freezing the feet. In a week, under the supervision of the whip, this group of recruits finally learned to distinguish between left and right, and began to learn to execute orders reflexively. Then, Schwartz, a general who is good at training soldiers, began to lead a group of veterans to train the recruits to walk in formation. However, although the formation is trained every day, in the afternoon and evening, some time will be taken out to train musket shooting and spear stabbing. Sometimes, every 2 or 3 days, the army has to be trained to attack the city. Originally, these projects were not available during the training period of recruits. However, because these recruits will soon go to the battlefield. Therefore, they can only insert some technical and tactical training in the middle of their Q training. When attacking the city, everyone did not train to climb the top of the city, because that kind of tactics would cause too many casualties. Marin directly asked everyone to train the tactics of infantry taking the opportunity to swarm in after blowing up the city gate or a section of the city wall. After all, Marin now has enough gunpowder. Not only did he bring back 300 tons of saltpeter from India and configure 400 tons of gunpowder, he also sent people to buy a large amount of gunpowder while buying lead blocks in southern Europe. Moreover, many fertilizer processing plants in the country have begun to scrape saltpeter soil and boil saltpeter in the manure pool. Therefore, there is a lot of gunpowder in the army, and there are enough shells and explosives to blow up the city gates or walls. Marin even set up a blasting team headed by Donitsrui, who were specially trained to use the oak door as a barrier and run to the city gate to place and bury oak barrels filled with gunpowder to blow up the city gate. The blasters were all strong and healthy, and they could still walk briskly with a big oak door and a gunpowder barrel on their backs. In order to enhance the oak door's resistance to attack, Schwartz also had iron sheets nailed on the surface of the oak door they used to block the attack, enhancing its ability to resist attacks. Inspired by this, Schwartz found Marin and wanted to establish a new type of soldier. What? You said you want to establish a large shield soldier. Isn't that a backward type of soldier? Marin was a little stunned. Large shield soldiers, that's something that only cold weapon troops have. Do modern troops need it? Yes, master, the defense of the shield soldiers is very good. Recently, when I was training for siege, the troops always suffered great losses when they rushed into the blown-up city gates or walls. Because the space is too small, if the infantry rushes in without protection, they are easily hurt by the enemy. Schwartz said seriously. So, you want the shield soldiers to rush in front to resist the enemy's swords and guns? Marin quickly understood what Schwartz meant. Yes, that's what I mean. Master, do you remember? The last time we attacked the Jever castle, Donitsrui rushed into the city with a big oak door. Although the oak door was broken, he was fine. Marin thought about it, and it was true. The last time we attacked the gate of Jever castle, under the stubborn resistance of the enemy, the East Frisian army suffered 20 to 30 casualties in a short period of time. Although the forwards under Marin's command all wore breastplate armor and helmets with masks. However, the legs, feet, arms, and waist were all lacking protection. So, although not many people died, many were injured. On the other hand, Donitsrui, the idiot, rushed forward with a big door on his shoulder, and was not hurt much, but the door was chopped down by the enemy. Thinking about it this way, the big shield soldiers are really necessary. However, a small shield is useless. Small round shields like those in ancient Rome and ancient Greece are useless. At least, you have to get a riot shield like a small door. Schwartz also agreed with this. In this way, the weapons of these big shield soldiers were decided: oak shields the size of a small door, with a layer of iron nailed on the outside, professionally protected from swords and knives. In addition, the attacking weapon of the big shield soldiers is the sailor's scimitar. In fact, according to the plan, these so-called big shield soldiers would find it difficult to hold the shield in their left hand and the knife in their right hand when attacking the blown-up city gates or the gaps in the city walls. Because the shield is too large, it is best to hold it with both hands. At that time, the scimitar was hung around the waist. The large shield soldiers, on the other hand, held their shields with both hands and slammed into the defenders in the city, using the impact of the shields to knock the other side dizzy. Even if they wanted to attack, they might not be able to cut through the iron sheet on the door. Then, relying on the impact force, this group of large shield soldiers rushed in first, occupied an open space, and let the people behind them in. If they could not move forward, they would stand their shields on the ground, support them with their left hands, and pull out the scimitars from their waists with their right hands to resist. At the same time, they would wait for the support of their comrades behind them. For example, the method invented by Marin on the spot during the last attack on Yevra Castle, where two soldiers carried a musketeer and shot forward from a high place, was trained intensively. This tactic is very vulgar. As long as the large shield soldiers in front can hold up, the musketeers can shoot forward from the air and clear those brave enemies. Of course, the premise of using this tactic is that the enemy is not equipped with muskets. Otherwise, the large oak shield covered with only a layer of iron can block swords, but not muskets. If the enemy has muskets, the tactics will change. After the big shield soldiers rush in, the long spearmen will rush in and stab forward desperately until they are entangled with the opponent's musketeers, so that the musketeers cannot shoot leisurely. But no matter what tactics are used, the big shield soldiers hold the big shield and rush in first, which is unchanged. However, the big shield soldiers are not used in many places, that is, they can be used during sieges, and they are not needed at all in field battles. Therefore, Marin and Schwartz agreed to train only 200 big shield soldiers, mainly for clearing the way and covering during sieges. Because when advancing, you need to hold the big shield to hit and smash the enemy. Therefore, the requirement for the big shield soldiers is that they are strong, can use the oak door covered with iron sheets as a weapon to smash people, and forcefully squeeze out space from the enemy army to let friendly troops enter the city. Therefore, Schwartz selected 200 strong men and formed a large shield soldier. They trained all day long how to use both hands to hold the iron shield to hit and squeeze people. Of course, if the shield was broken by the opponent, they would also draw their scimitars and fight desperately. Chapter 75 Our Army and Friendly Forces. While Marin was preparing, Lübeck and Hamburg were not idle either. Marin's 10,000-man army in the Teutonic Kingdom had transported 9,000 people to the manor outside Lübeck and hid them. As for the 1,000 lancers, they were not transported yet, but waited until the last few days. Because the lancers have many war horses. As long as the infantry hides their weapons, they can disguise themselves as civilian workers. The cavalry is difficult to disguise, just because their war horses are too tall and majestic. Therefore, the 1,000 lancers have to wait for the last batch to be transported, so as not to attract the attention of the Danes too early. After all, both Lübeck and Hamburg are on the edge of the Duchy of Holstein, and they used to belong to the Duchy of Holstein. In particular, Hamburg is actually closer to Gluckstadt, the capital of the Duchy of Holstein. Gluckstadt is also at the mouth of the Elbe River, closer to the estuary than Hamburg. However, Marin's army cannot be deployed in Hamburg. It's just because there are too many people here and it's too close to Gluckstadt. Apart from other things, if the army is transported to Hamburg, it must take the Elbe River route, and passing through Gluckstadt will easily attract the attention of the other side. Therefore, it is better to stay in the territory of Lübeck. Because, to transport the army from the Teutonic Kingdom to Lübeck, it only needs to go through the Baltic Sea, without passing through the Øresund Strait controlled by the Danes, nor through Gluckstadt on the Elbe River. As for the 60-kilometer distance between Hamburg and Lübeck, the army can only rely on long-distance raids, and there is no shortcut. Fortunately, Lübeck agreed to rent 4,000 draft horses from neighboring areas, so that the 4,000 most elite troops of the Eastern Army can quickly reach Gluckstadt and capture the city before the local army of the Principality of Holstein reacts. In addition, the city of Hamburg also secretly recruited 5,000 mercenaries. However, in order to prevent the Principality of Holstein from noticing, 3,000 of them were sent to East Frisia and asked Marin to bring them together. The remaining 2,000 mercenaries were arranged in a country estate outside the city of Hamburg for secret training. When Marin learned that Hamburg was going to send 3,000 mercenaries to East Frisia, his head was full of black lines. Damn, this is a hot potato thrown to me. The mercenaries hired by Hamburg are not novices, but veterans. Although these veteran mercenaries have a certain combat effectiveness. However, these veteran mercenaries also have a common problem: they are easy to harm the people. It can be said that many ordinary mercenaries of this era are villains. Burning, killing, looting, etc. are just their habits. In order to prevent these 3,000 mercenaries from making trouble, Marin sent out 2,000 veterans. From the time they entered the country, they followed them all the way and closely monitored them. Sure enough, after these guys entered the wealthy East Frisia, they began to be dishonest. Seeing that the black bread people eat on the farm is softer and tastier than the black stick bread they usually eat, these bastards want to rob it. These are all trivial matters. The key is that some mercenaries saw the young girls and wives in the manor and wanted to bully them. The East Frisian veterans who were monitoring them were not happy. In East Frisia, molesting women is a serious violation of the law. Seeing that some mercenaries actually wanted to drag the young girls into the woods, the soldiers immediately rushed up and beat the guy who attempted to commit violence into a pig's head. If they were not concerned about them being friendly troops, it would be normal to kill them. This stirred up a hornet's nest, so a large-scale group fight started. Maybe because they knew that the other party was a friendly army, everyone threw away their two-handed swords and spears, rolled up their sleeves and started fighting with bare hands. At the beginning of the contact, the few young East Frisian veterans who rushed to the front suffered a loss when they fought with several experienced veteran mercenaries on the opposite side. After all, those veterans were able to survive to this day, and their personal martial arts were very good. But as the fight went on, these Hamburg mercenaries were unknowingly divided and surrounded by the East Frisian veterans. At the commander's signal, the East Frisian veterans tacitly formed groups of 3 and 10 people, and inserted from the side, dividing the Hamburg mercenaries into several small pieces, each of which was surrounded by the East Frisian veterans. As a result, 3,000 Hamburg mercenaries were divided and surrounded by 2,000 East Frisian veterans. As the fight went on, more and more Hamburg mercenaries were bruised. When these veterans who had lost their combat effectiveness were let go, they were horrified to find that they were actually surrounded. However, those Hamburg mercenaries who had not been knocked down did not realize this. Wiseman, the officer sent by Hamburg to lead this group of mercenaries, was still watching the excitement on the side, but when he saw that 3,000 Hamburg mercenaries were beaten by 2,000 East Frisians, he finally couldn't sit still. So he quickly found the East Frisian commander, Knight Glatska, who was also watching the excitement on the side, and asked him to stop. So, Gratsk blew the birch whistle for the assembly, and the East Frisian veterans quickly withdrew from the battle group and lined up in neat rows, leaving behind the Hamburg mercenaries with bruised faces all over the ground. Although there were many unlucky East Frisian veterans with bruised faces, most of them were still relatively intact. Even fighting is so professional, it is indeed a strong army. Hamburg officer Weizmann sighed. As for the mercenaries hired by the Hamburg people, after being beaten hard, they became honest and never dared to do anything wrong again. Of course, Marin did not treat them badly. The Kohler bread, soft black bread mixed with straw chaff and wild vegetables, without soil was enough, which made these guys very happy. Marin did not intend to teach these people new things, but just let them train according to the previous training methods. Marin went to see it specially and found that these guys had inserted a lot of wooden stakes and straw men in the barracks. Then, one by one, holding a spear and a two-handed sword, they held their breath against the wooden stakes and straw men. After holding back to a certain extent, they shouted loudly, stabbed the straw man with a spear, or chopped the two-handed sword at the wooden stake. In short, these guys are constantly practicing their fighting skills. However, they don't train the Q. For their commander, as long as they maintain a loose formation and don't run away, they are qualified. As for the rest, it depends on their personal martial arts. Marin looked at their training and shook his head. However, he was not interested in instructing these guys. Because he knew that these people were just a group of villains who were greedy for money. Teaching them would not do him any good. Maybe one day, these guys will be hired by Marin's mortal enemy. If they use what they have learned from themselves to deal with themselves, it would be a big loss. The mercenaries under Marin are different from them. When Marin recruited mercenaries, he never wanted those old mercenaries, but only those ordinary rural youths. The general requirements are honest character, strength, courage and unwillingness to admit defeat. The most important thing is to be obedient. As for those old soldiers and the gangsters in the city, Marin had strictly prohibited them from being recruited. Even when recruiting those wandering knights, Marin only selected young wandering knights who had left home not long ago and were still very innocent. Marin also declined those old-fashioned middle-aged wandering knights. In addition to Marin's strict military discipline and long-term education, as well as the professional brainwashing disciples educated by Assistant Bishop Taylor in the past year or so, who preached and brainwashed them every day, the veterans under Marin not only admired Marin more, but also had good discipline and high quality. Moreover, Marin promised that after they had served for 10 years, they would obtain their own land in East Frisia, settle down here, obtain local household registration, and become self-employed farmers with land property rights. Of course, if these people ran away with others halfway and were hired by others, they would not be qualified. But generally speaking, the veterans under Marin, under the brainwashing education of Taylor's disciples and the strict discipline they have long observed, have become accustomed to the life of serving as soldiers under Marin. Moreover, Marin treated them well, never starved them, never owed them wages, and provided them with relatively soft, Kohler bread. There are extra meals on every festival. For example, salted fish, pork and so on. Therefore, there are basically no people who want to leave here. 2 different armies are stationed in Leer County. The camps of both sides are almost close together. When the mercenaries in Hamburg got up in the morning and shouted at the straw man and the stakes to hold their breath, the veterans of East Frisia had already finished their daily routine of 5 kilometers with backpacks on their backs. In the East Frisian army, except for rainy and snowy weather, the soldiers have to run 5 kilometers every morning and evening to exercise their physical fitness. Therefore, now the veterans of East Frisia march 40 kilometers a day, which is light. If they march quickly, they can reach 60 kilometers a day. Of course, after the forced march, the whole army must eat braised pork to nourish themselves, otherwise they will not be able to eat it the next day. Of course, these are veterans. As for the 5,000 new recruits, Marin did not have much hope for them. They have not yet adapted to the 5-kilometer physical training every morning and evening. It is impossible to run so far in a day without a year or so. Therefore, when the war begins, Marin plans to let the 5,000 new recruits march with the 3,000 mercenaries that Hamburg placed in East Frisia. On the one hand, it is because they are not physically fit enough, and on the other hand, it is also to monitor the 3,000 veterans in Hamburg to prevent them from causing trouble on the road. Chapter 76 Simultaneous Declaration of War. At the end of January 1503, 17 carracks of different sizes purchased from Spain finally arrived. Then, Columbus immediately boarded these carracks with a group of sailors and half of the gunners from the previous warships and began simple adaptive training. By February 5, all preparations were completed. Even Schwartz rushed to Lübeck a few days ago to command the 10,000 troops shipped from the Teutonic Kingdom. After all the preparations were completed, it was natural to show their fangs. So, on February 5, the County of Oldenburg and Denmark received the letter of war at the same time. It was not until he received the letter of war that King Hans of Denmark discovered to his horror that he was declared war by 3 forces at the same time: Lübeck, Hamburg and East Frisia. If a single family declared war, King Hans of Denmark would not care. However, if 3 families were together, it would be terrible. Especially at such a critical moment. In January, in order to attract Denmark's attention, Sweden launched a counterattack in a local area, attracting a lot of Denmark's attention. For this reason, King Hans of Denmark drew 1,000 soldiers from the Duchy of Holstein and the Duchy of Schleswig to support the Danish battlefield. Now, there are only more than 2,000 soldiers left in the Duchy of Holstein, and only more than 1,200 people guarding Gluckstadt. The Duchy of Schleswig is not much better, with only more than 2,000 people left, and only 1,500 people guarding the city of Schleswig. Even the Danish capital of Copenhagen has only 2,500 defenders at this time. Fortunately, Denmark is a maritime power, and the enemy's army cannot easily land on Zealand Island. Even if they ventured to land on Zealand Island, it would be easy for the Danish navy to easily cut off the supply line. If the other side cannot capture Copenhagen on Zealand Island in a short time, the army will starve to death. However, Lübeck's letter of war was very arrogant, saying that a fleet would be sent to destroy the port of Copenhagen. For safety reasons, King Hans of Denmark immediately ordered all 200 warships along the Swedish coast to return to defense. As the Queen of Hanseatic League, Lübeck is the strongest in the Hanseatic League. Among its more than 1,000 merchant ships, it can select about 110 large ships as warships. As the Queen of the Hanseatic League, or the deputy leader of the Hanseatic League, Hamburg also has hundreds of merchant ships, which can make up 90 warships. Before, Denmark and the Hanseatic League had a great naval battle, of course, that was in the 14th century. That time, Denmark lost. The reason is that the fleets of Lübeck, Hamburg and Bremen joined together. Therefore, learning from the last lesson, Danish Navy Minister Thomason ordered the fleet to be divided into 2. The main fleet left 80 ships to surround Copenhagen, while the other 120 ships went north to intercept Hamburg's fleet. Thomason was a very smart man. He knew that Lübeck's naval strength was stronger. However, he firmly believed that relying on Copenhagen's defense capabilities, although 80 warships could not defeat the Lübeck people, they were enough to defend the port of Copenhagen. As for the other 120 warships, they are responsible for defeating the Hamburg fleet. As long as Copenhagen's 80 warships do not go out to fight casually in the early stage, it is still no problem to protect Copenhagen. Then, the other 120 warships are obviously stronger than Hamburg. If the Hamburg fleet can be defeated first and then join forces with the Copenhagen fleet, then there is a great hope of defeating the Lübeck fleet. It must be said that Thomason's strategy is very well formulated. If there were only the fleets of Lübeck and Hamburg, it would be easy to be defeated by Denmark. After all, Denmark sent a stronger fleet than Hamburg, which is easier to win. After defeating the Hamburg fleet, the 2 Danish fleets will reunite and fight to the port of Lübeck with more power than Lübeck, and it will be easy to win. However, they did not expect that Marin quietly put together 23 professional warships and got 17 Spanish caravels to pretend to assist. Moreover, after Marin invented simple flag language, he quietly taught it to Lübeck and Hamburg. Nowadays, the naval commanders of Lübeck and Hamburg all understand the high-end command method of flag language. The Danes don't understand it yet. Compared with the nervousness of King Hans of Denmark, Count John V of Oldenburg is terrified. It is no secret that the county of East Frisia has tens of thousands of troops. Moreover, Marin relied on this 10,000 troops to defeat the Saxon army of 20,000. Therefore, the county of Oldenburg is still very afraid of Marin's tens of thousands of troops. However, because they have Denmark as a backer, they have the confidence. However, John V never thought that Marin would dare to declare war on the county of Oldenburg regardless of Denmark's maritime threats. You know, the last time Marin was surrounded by the Danish navy, he quickly admitted his defeat after the port of Emden. Therefore, after receiving the letter of war, John V did not recruit troops immediately, but wrote to Denmark first, asking for Denmark's support and help. However, John V did not know that at this moment, his cousin, King Hans of Denmark, had also received Marin's letter of war. That is to say, after receiving Marin's letter of war that day, John V did not immediately mobilize the country. He was still dreaming that Denmark would come to mediate and scare Marin. At this time, Marin, with 5,000 veterans, had gathered in the border area of Leer County, and brought 5,000 horses, ready to wait until dark to ride on the horse for a long-distance raid on Oldenburg city. As for the 5,000 recruits, they had to wait until dawn the next day, and then follow the 3,000 mercenaries in Hamburg to catch up. 5,000 veterans have been trained for a long time. Moreover, no one has night blindness. That's because Marin treats those veterans well, often has meat to eat, and often eats animal livers. Everyone is not short of vitamin A, so naturally there is no night blindness. Moreover, Marin has trained many times before, and has specially trained for night riding, so there is no problem. If the 5,000 new soldiers were to make a long-distance raid at night, many people would be lost. Only the veterans who had trained together for a long time could successfully reach the destination at night and complete the raid without anyone falling behind. On the same day, Schwartz also gathered all 15,000 troops, including 5,000 mercenaries from Lübeck, outside the city of Lübeck. The 10,000 troops who had stayed in the Teutonic state for a long time were originally trained by Schwartz. Therefore, Schwartz was very good at commanding them. As for the 5,000 mercenaries in Lübeck, Schwartz used them as civilians. Because there was also a night raid mission, Schwartz selected 4,000 elite infantry, together with 1,000 lancers who had war horses. After resting enough during the day, they rode westward on the night after the declaration of war, galloping towards Gluckstadt, more than 60 kilometers away. As for whether the horses could bear it, 60 kilometers would not be a big problem. After we take down Gluckstadt, we can feed the horses some good food. For example, we can feed them some oats or eggs. Chapter 77, The Raid on Oldenburg. The eastern border of Lisle County is not too far from the city of Oldenburg, only less than 40 kilometers. The horses run for an hour, rest for half an hour, and then run for another hour, and they are almost there. Then, they can recover by feeding some oats. For this reason, before the expedition, each horse used by the army had a saddle bag on its neck, which contained more than 10 pounds of fried oats. The saddle bag on the neck of Marin's warhorse Karl was more advanced, with fried soybeans. Who asked Amerigo Island to send back a few bags of soybeans. After the assembly, taking advantage of the weak moonlight from the crescent moon in the sky, 5,000 veterans mounted their horses, carrying weapons, and ran all the way to the direction of Oldenburg. Because the weapons were large shields as big as door panels, the large shield soldiers suffered the most when riding horses. Therefore, Marin specially equipped the 100 large shield soldiers who accompanied him with 2 horses. Because the shields are quite heavy. As for the other 100 large shield soldiers, they were sent to Hamburg by ship. They will meet up with Schwartz's army outside Hamburg at midnight. In addition, Donitzrui's blasting team also suffered a lot. They brought several gunpowder barrels and needed 2 horses for each person. 5,000 cavalrymen, the march was very powerful, but not chaotic at all. This is because Marin had trained once before to travel at night, and everyone had experience. The team was led by the scouts under Saul. They had to walk this road every night these days to familiarize themselves with the situation and prepare to guide the large army. After so long, they were very familiar with this road. Under the guidance of the scout guide, the army whistled past in the moonlight, and the sound of horse hooves made the earth tremble. Although the manners along the way were alarmed, no one dared to come out to inquire about the news, and no one dared to report to the direction of Oldenburg. Because no one is a fool, not to mention the danger at night, as long as someone is seen riding a horse towards the direction of Oldenburg, he will definitely be chased and killed. In this way, Marin brought 100 large shield soldiers, 1,000 musketeers, and 3,900 spearmen to gallop on horseback, and it took more than 3 hours to arrive outside the city of Oldenburg. According to the previous arrangement, the army quietly went around the east gate of Oldenburg. Because Marin had sent people to declare war during the day, at this time, the west gate facing the East Frisian state must be the most strictly guarded. Therefore, attacking from the east gate is the best choice. Then, Marin took the army and rested for an hour far away from the east gate, and fed the horses with oats. After that, Marin took out the double-bang firecrackers used in the army and threw one into the sky to explode. At the same time, everyone got on the horse again. The 100 East Frisian scouts who had been waiting in the east gate of Oldenburg immediately swarmed out of the nearby houses and killed the unsuspecting defenders of the east gate of Oldenburg. At the same time, Marin's army also began to ride horses and approached the city gate. After arriving outside the city gate, everyone dismounted, handed the horses to a small number of soldiers, and then began to line up quickly. Among them, 100 large shield soldiers were in the front. The movement of the army outside the city alarmed the defenders on the city wall. However, when they reacted, it was too late. Because the 100 scouts attacking the east gate had already opened the east gate at this time. Then, 100 large shield soldiers took the lead, holding up the big shields of the door panels, and rushed into the city. Marin suddenly remembered that he couldn't let the enemy run away. So he immediately ordered 1,000 men to guard the north gate of Oldenburg to prevent the members of the Oldenburg family from escaping. There is a river to the south of Oldenburg city and East Frisia to the west. If the east gate is breached, the other party is very likely to flee to the north. Therefore, Marin sent 1,000 people to block people outside the north gate. In addition, 300 people went to the west gate. If someone breaks out of the west gate, the people sent to the west gate will take the initiative to set off double-bang firecrackers to send a signal. At this time, the city of Oldenburg was in chaos. There were only 1,000 defenders in the city, half of whom were on the city wall, and the other half were protecting the royal palace in the center of the city. And those residents, hearing the shouting and killing in the middle of the night, did not dare to go out, but just made a mess at home. Therefore, there were not many people on the streets of Oldenburg at this time. Therefore, Marin directly led more than 3,000 troops and quickly approached the direction of the royal palace. At this time, John V and other members of the Oldenburg family were awakened. What happened? What happened? Seeing the chaos outside, John V hurriedly got up and asked loudly. "My Lord Count, the East Frisian army is coming." A palace guard shouted anxiously. "What? So fast? They just issued a declaration of war during the day." John V's face was pale. At this time, the Oldenburg army was defenseless, and only the west gate blocked the door in the city with something. The other gates were not ready for defense at all. John V was still in a daze, and Marin's army had rushed to the center of the city and quickly surrounded the royal palace. In addition, Marin sent people to control the other three gates. When he learned that the west gate was blocked by bricks and wood by the Oldenburgers, Marin confidently divided his troops to the north gate and south gate to seize the city gate. It is very easy to seize the city gate from the inside, because the other party did not think that they would be attacked from behind. In this way, the north gate and the south gate were quickly captured, and only some of the soldiers guarding the south gate escaped from the city and boarded the boat on the Hunt River and fled. But according to the captives, those who escaped were ordinary soldiers, not members of the Oldenburg family that Marin valued. In fact, the members of the Oldenburg family basically lived in the royal palace compound and did not have residences outside the palace. Of course, it is better to say that it is a large castle complex than a royal palace. The largest castle in the middle is obviously the residence of John V. Several small castles nearby were inhabited by John V's clansmen. However, for safety reasons, several castles were within a tall wall and guarded by a large number of troops. When the north gate was opened, 1,000 troops outside the north gate also came in to participate in the siege of the Oldenburg palace. In addition to the more than 800 soldiers guarding the other three gates and the 300 men outside the west gate, the remaining 3,800 soldiers surrounded the Oldenburg palace, which was defended by only 500 people. The 500 defenders on the city wall surrendered from time to time, that is, they tied themselves down from the bottom of the city wall with ropes and fled overnight. After all, they were facing 5,000 soldiers. If they couldn't win the battle wisely, how many people would be willing to fight to the death? Moreover, the most loyal guards of the earldom of Oldenburg were all in the palace compound. Thinking of the experience of Edisard I escaping from the tunnel, Marin waved and called Saul, "Saul, send some scouts with binoculars to guard outside the city. If you see someone in luxurious clothes running away on horseback, be sure to stay." Saul obviously remembered the escape of Edisard I, and immediately arranged 200 scouts to patrol out of the city on horseback. But Marin didn't know that because of Denmark as a big backer, the members of the Oldenburg family never thought of running away. So, they didn't dig any tunnels at all. At this time, the members of the Oldenburg family were all running around in the palace in a panic. Marin did not launch an attack at night, but waited until dawn before letting Donitsrui's demolition team move forward. It was still the same formula. After using the engineer's shovel to dig open the stone slab in front of the east gate of the palace, the demolition team dug a hole under the palace gate and buried a gunpowder barrel. After a loud bang, the gate of the Oldenburg palace collapsed. Then, a group of shield soldiers, holding their shields, rushed in first and hit anyone they saw with their shields. Khan, Marin's personal bodyguard, was also itching to fight. He put on full plate armor, carried a mace, and rushed in. As for Marin himself, he did not go deep, but chose to observe the battle situation with a telescope on the wall of the east gate of the palace. About 2 hours later, most of the defenders in the palace were cleared. Only a few dozen guards were left, guarding the main castle where John V was. "Count Marin, I am John V, I demand negotiations." "Request negotiations." John V shouted in the castle. He was very scared, afraid of dying like his brother-in-law Edo Wilmken. So he was cowardly and wanted to save his life through negotiations. Hearing John V's cry, Marin was also happy. This is a war to destroy a country. You are still talking about negotiations. Do you think I am a vegetarian? How can I spit out the meat in my mouth? So Marin ignored him at all and continued to order the attack. When Donitsui's blasting team blew open the gate of the main castle of the palace again, Marin was not in a hurry to attack. He sent people to find a lot of firewood from the homes of nearby residents, lit it at the gate, and threw it into the castle. John V was frightened and thought that Marin wanted to burn him to death, so he quickly surrendered and asked for the treatment of noble captives. In fact, Marin just wanted to smoke them. However, there were many wooden furniture in the castle, which was indeed easy to cause a fire. No wonder John V misunderstood. Marin agreed to John V's request for the treatment of noble captives. Anyway, he didn't plan to kill John V. However, it would be impossible for this person to rule Oldenburg again in the future. Of course, Marin was not in a hurry to discuss the issue of territory, but forced John V to sign an order ordering the city of Ferrol to surrender. John V refused, so Marin immediately asked Khan, who looked ferocious, to take out a bloody knife and said he would help him bleed to cure the disease. In desperation, John V had to sign an order, ordering the defenders of Ferrol to surrender unconditionally. After getting the document, Marin immediately asked Saul to send his men, 1 man and 2 horses, to the outside of Ferrol to find the team led by Stade. The troops responsible for attacking Ferrol were the new recruits led by Stade and the 3,000 mercenaries from Hamburg. At the same time, this team also brought a lot of heavy artillery and other supplies. When Saul's scouts arrived with the order documents, the army led by Stade had not yet arrived at the city of Ferrol. After all, they were advancing on foot. On the same day, Adler also led 2,000 elite East Frisian militias to attack 2 small towns in the Jever area, Jever Castle and Wangerland. Chapter 78, Fraudulently Signing an Unequal Treaty. When Marin captured the city of Oldenburg, Schwartz also took 5,000 elite soldiers, rode horses, and galloped 60 kilometers overnight. After joining the army waiting in Hamburg, he arrived at the north gate of Gluckstadt before dawn, and with the help of the scouts who had been prepared in the city, he successfully opened the north gate of Gluckstadt and entered the city. Although he brought large shield soldiers, Schwartz did not have a blasting team. Therefore, after controlling the 4 gates, Schwartz's army could only surround the castle in the city as the royal palace. There was no strong attack, just siege. Although the Duke of the Duchy of Holstein is King Hans of Denmark, the Duchy of Holstein is independent of Denmark. Therefore, there is also an independent small court, a palace minister, and an independent garrison. However, because 1,000 troops were withdrawn, the only 1,200 defenders left in the city were no match for Schwartz's elite men. Moreover, Schwartz arrived before dawn, and people were the most sleepy at this time. Therefore, after taking the north gate, Schwartz's army easily swept away the defenders of the 4 gates and surrounded the castle palace where the Prime Minister of Holstein, Bentheim, and a group of local nobles retreated. Then, Schwartz was not in a hurry. Because he had to wait for Marin's army to join him. At the same time, there were 5,000 troops to come behind. After taking the capital of the Principality of Holstein, there was no need to worry about the general mobilization of the Principality of Holstein. Because the Prime Minister who issued the mobilization order was besieged. Therefore, Schwartz could wait leisurely for Marin's army to join him. When Hamburg's 2,000 troops came, Schwartz directly handed over the task of besieging the palace castle to the Hamburg mercenaries. Because at this time there were only a group of nobles and more than 200 soldiers in the palace, and the rest were either killed or surrendered. Therefore, there was no problem at all to hand over the task of besieging the castle to the Hamburg mercenaries. After all, these 2,000 mercenaries are veterans specially hired by Hamburg, not novices, and they will not be broken through by just 200 people. Besides, even if the other party can break through the siege of the Hamburg mercenaries, they can't escape. Because the 4 city gates are under the control of Schwartz's army. In addition, Lübeck's 5,000 mercenaries did not act with Schwartz's other 5,000 infantry. This group of people went directly north to Kiel, intending to take Kiel, an important port in the Baltic Sea region. In fact, the Lübeck people are very sure about taking Kiel. Although a member of the Oldenburg family is stationed in Kiel to manage this place. But at the same time, Kiel is also one of the Hanseatic cities. The Lübeck people have great power in Kiel. When the Lübeck army arrives, there will inevitably be Hanseatic merchants who open the city gates to welcome the Lübeck army to settle in. It is precisely because there are internal responses in Kiel that the Lübeck people have enough self-confidence to send troops to Kiel alone. Otherwise, with Kiel's strong walls, even with 5,000 soldiers, it would take a long time to attack. As for Neumünster halfway, the Lübeck army didn't even look at it. Because they didn't have an insider in Neumünster. How difficult would it be to attack without an insider? Such a hard bone should be left to Marin. In Oldenburg, after Saul's scouts delivered the order documents, Stade was overjoyed. Then, Stade led 5,000 new recruits and 3,000 Hamburg mercenaries, a total of 8,000 troops, surrounded the small town of Ferrol, which had only a few hundred defenders, and scared the generals who defended the city half to death. Then, it was Stade who asked the artillery to come up and bombarded the gate of Ferrol a few times. Hark, the defender of Ferrol, who had only 500 troops, was terrified, and the idea of surrendering came out of his mind uncontrollably. He knew that facing the 7,000 or 8,000 people on the opposite side, his 500 defenders could not stand it. However, surrendering before fighting a few times would be very embarrassing. In the future, he would be labeled as a coward. Fortunately, Stade was very considerate and quickly sent someone to deliver the surrender order signed by John V. Seeing that he had a way out, Hark immediately summoned his subordinates and showed John V's order document to find a way out for his surrender. The others were also relieved. Surrendering without a fight was a shame for them, the sons of nobles. However, with the monarch's order, there was no responsibility. So, Ferrol's soldiers happily opened the city gates, laid down their weapons and surrendered. But Jever, which Adler attacked, encountered a lot of trouble. There was no problem with the small town of Wangerland, because the walls of the small town of Wangerland were too thin. Adler's army carried 6-pound cannons and easily blasted a gap in one day. Then, the stubborn defenders inside were hacked to death. However, the Jever castle captured by Marin last time was still strong. Adler spent a lot of effort but couldn't conquer it. In desperation, he gave up the strong attack and switched to siege. Because he knew that there was not much food in the castle. After all, when Marin withdrew before, he looted all the food in the city. And when Oldenburg took over here, he didn't bring much food. Relying on the siege, the defenders can be forced to surrender. But the premise is that they have to eat up all the food in the city first. Not to mention Adler's siege of Jever, Marin also used threats and inducements to John V in the royal palace in Oldenburg, forcing him to give up the sovereignty of the county of Oldenburg to himself. But what was unexpected was that John V, who was afraid of death before, heard that Marin wanted sovereignty. Even though he was very scared, he refused to let go and refused to transfer the sovereignty to Marin, and only agreed to return the Jever area. Even though Khan repeatedly threatened him, and used methods such as locking him in a small dark room and lighting him up to prevent him from sleeping, John V refused to give in. If Europe was popular with imperial seals like in ancient China, then there would be no need to worry. Just find John V's imperial seal and stamp it. It has always been popular in Europe for nobles to sign in person, and later some auxiliary means of stamping were added. Marin originally wanted to find some documents signed by John V to forge documents. However, when the palace was besieged, John V didn't know what was wrong with his brain, and he actually burned all the documents in the palace. Marin couldn't find any documents to refer to for a while, so he could only force John V to sign himself. However, when it comes to territorial sovereignty, John V's courage rises, and he almost sees death as home. As a last resort, Marin had to start thinking about how to make John V willingly sign himself and give up the sovereignty of the earldom of Oldenburg. At first, Marin thought of fooling around, but the other party was obviously not so easy to fool. After all, the great nobles are generally well informed and will not be easily moved by sweet words. Finally, Marin thought of deception. After thinking about it, Marin thought of a scene he saw in a TV series in his previous life. The villain deliberately overlapped two pieces of paper, and the signature at the bottom was on the bottom layer of paper. The main text above was on another piece of paper. The content of the treaty on the other paper is very beneficial to the person being cheated. If the paper covering it is removed, the real content of the treaty below will be revealed. It is a pitfall treaty that makes the signer lose everything. Thinking of this, Marin decided to use this method to deceive John V. He found 4 pieces of parchment and used a very clever technique to temporarily glue the 2 pieces of parchment together with the juice of rice porridge. Of course, if you look closely, you can still see it. However, at night, under the dim light, Marin wrote down the real content of the contract on the parchment below. John V announced that he would hand over the sovereignty of the county of East Frisia to Marin, and only retain the palace in Oldenburg. Then, the entire Oldenburg family would live in this palace and receive a total living allowance of 10,000 gold coins per year. As for how to distribute this living allowance, John V, the head of the family, would be responsible. In addition, John V would also unconditionally transfer all the manors and lands in the county controlled by family members to Marin on behalf of the Oldenburg family. The fake contract covered above stated that Marin would only take back Jever. At the same time, the earldom of Oldenburg needed to pay a compensation of 100,000 gold coins in 5 years. Although such a contract was a little harsh, it was by no means unacceptable. Marin used the technique of grafting to make 2 pieces of parchment out of the 4 pieces of parchment, which looked like 2 formal contracts. Then, Marin asked Khan to capture John V and put him in a light array composed of candles and bronze mirrors for several hours, and did not let him sleep. When it was midnight and John V was drowsy, he was taken into a small room with only a weak oil lamp and forced to sign the contract. Because he had been illuminated by the light array for several hours before, John V's eyesight was affected in the short term. With the dim light of a small oil lamp in the hut, John V really didn't see the loophole. Although the fake treaty given by Marin was a little harsh, because it stated that it would be paid off within 5 years, John V began to think crookedly. In his opinion, within 5 years, the earldom of Oldenburg would be able to rely on the power of Denmark to force Marin to give up the compensation of 100,000 gold coins. It might even take down Jever again. So, with a sly joy, he signed his name on both contracts, stamped and pressed his handprint. Marin also signed his name on both contracts. Then, Marin laughed wildly, tore off the top layer of the contract, revealing the true content of the contract. "I am going to kill you. You bastard, dare to lie to me, you will die." John V tried his best to snatch the contract and destroy it, but Marin would never let him do as he wished. Khan came over and skillfully knocked John V unconscious and took him away. With the unequal treaty signed by John V himself, Marin was confident. After all, these handwritings, fingerprints and seals cannot be faked. Even if seals and fingerprints can be faked, the name signed by John V himself is difficult to forge. Of course, this is for people of this era. But Marin made John V willingly sign this time, which really made Marin feel happy. After all, pitting the enemy, the sense of accomplishment is full. Chapter 79 Meeting at the Elbe River. After tricking John V into signing an unequal treaty, Marin was in a good mood. Moreover, the news of Farrell's surrender soon came. Only Jever was not going well, and Adler had no good way to deal with Jever Castle. Because he had neither heavy artillery nor a demolition team. In desperation, Adler had to leave 500 elite soldiers to continue the siege. Then, he took 1,500 elite soldiers and went directly to Oldenburg to take over the territory. The reason for this was Marin's previous arrangement. According to the plan, after Marin captured Oldenburg, he would continue to lead the army eastward and join Schwarz in the Duchy of Holstein. Then, the army went north together and gradually removed the cities and fortresses that had not yet been conquered. Because the heavy artillery was in Marin's army. The 2,000 militiamen led by Adler, although they were militiamen, had been trained for much longer time than Marin's newly recruited recruits, and they were also more elite. However, these people usually had to farm the land, and Marin would only choose to recruit them when manpower was tight. In peacetime wars, Marin still chooses to use off-duty mercenaries. In this way, agricultural production will not be affected. However, because Saxony sent more than 10,000 civilians, Marin actually had no shortage of serfs for arable land. In addition, Marin had 20,000 to 30,000 cattle, and the animal power was extremely abundant. Therefore, even if these 7,000 militiamen did not participate in spring plowing, they would not delay the farming season. Only during the autumn harvest, because animal power could not be used and only human harvesting was possible, these militiamen had to participate. Otherwise, if there was heavy rain during the autumn harvest, it would be over. In fact, these 7,000 militiamen were recruited and organized when the Saxony family ruled East Frisia. After Marin occupied the East Frisian state, in order to control this large number of troops, he specially killed all the small nobles who originally ruled these militias, leaving them leaderless. Then, Marin promoted his own people and followers of the original Block family, Marin's grandfather's family, as commanders of this militia. Even old Hoffman directly became the supreme leader of the 7,000 militiamen. In this way, the officers of this militia have all become their own people. In addition, Marin has been good to the people in recent years, especially the bread is enough, which is much better than the rule of the Saxony family. Therefore, after a few years, the people of East Frisia have basically returned to their hearts. These militiamen also come from the people, so they are naturally basically returned to their hearts. Although, after several years of intermittent training, the combat effectiveness of this militia army is much stronger than that of recruits. However, Marin considered that the security of the East Frisia country is also very important. Therefore, Marin's choice is to use regular troops to defend the country at ordinary times. Once a large-scale national war is fought, when the regular army needs to leave the border, these militias will be recruited for the defense of the country. In this way, Marin can also take the army out with confidence without worrying about the old nest being taken over. This time is no exception. When Marin led the army to go on an expedition, the domestic defense work was naturally handed over to the 7,000 militiamen. Moreover, after taking over the earldom of Oldenburg, Marin also needed to leave enough troops to garrison. Otherwise, the small nobles in this place would launch a rebellion, and Marin's efforts would go to waste. Therefore, Marin chose to let the brave Adler lead 1,500 elite militiamen to station in Oldenburg to monitor the local nobles and prevent them from rebelling. At the same time, Adler was also fully responsible for the supervision and surveillance of the members of the Oldenburg family. When Adler arrived in Oldenburg with 1,500 elite militiamen, Marin immediately handed over the defense of the earldom of Oldenburg to Adler. However, before leaving, in order to prevent the country nobles of the earldom of Oldenburg from rebelling, Marin posted a notice to appease the people, saying that he was willing to swear that he would never kill any local nobles if the local nobles did not rebel. This was mainly because when Marin occupied the earldom of East Frisia, he almost killed all the local small nobles. Marin was afraid that the small nobles of the earldom of Oldenburg would rise up in rebellion because they were worried that they would end up dead like the original small nobles of the earldom of East Frisia. Marin was now in a hurry to beat Denmark, so he naturally had no time to care about these small country nobles of the earldom of Oldenburg. But he was worried that they would cause trouble for Adler. So Marin posted a notice, expressing his attitude that he would not kill people indiscriminately this time. In fact, the reason why Marin did this was to consider the issue of future rule. It is enough to do the things of the earldom of East Frisia once. If you do it too much, your reputation will be ruined. Moreover, if you kill all the local nobles every time you occupy a country, no matter which country you attack next time, you will be desperately resisted by the nobles of the other side. Because you will die if you don't resist, and you will die if you resist, so you might as well fight. In this case, Marin will encounter great difficulties. Therefore, Marin decided that he would no longer raise the butcher knife when he occupied any country in the future. He decided to learn from Prussia's practice of unifying Germany, just depriving the local nobles of their right to rule, but retaining their names. The earldom of Oldenburg is the first model area that Marin intends to create. Only by treating the local nobles who do not resist well, when Marin fights other countries in the future, will the nobles in those places be willing to surrender. Otherwise, they will fight to the end and cause great trouble to Marin. Of course, Marin is not a good person either. When the dust settles, Marin plans to deprive the nobles of the earldom of Oldenburg of the management rights of their arable land. However, Marin will pay them enough rent according to the current output of these nobles' arable land. For example, the rye land in the earldom of Oldenburg now yields less than 150 pounds per acre. The harvest that the nobles get from the manor is about less than 100 pounds per acre. At that time, Marin can pay them a fixed income of 100 pounds of rye per acre. However, it will be different if the control of these manors is in the hands of Marin. With the help of fertilizer blocks, the local rye yield per acre can reach 400 or 500 pounds per acre. And the extra yield is Marin's own. In this way, the interests of the local nobles in Oldenburg are not damaged. And Marin, because of his advanced production technology, can also gain more after obtaining the management rights of those lands. It can be said that this is a win-win situation. As for the local nobles, Marin plans to build a new city in the future, a gambling city similar to Las Vegas. Build various entertainment facilities and venues in the city for the nobles to have fun. In the future, these nobles will sit in the gambling city every day to eat, drink and have fun. And their original land will send a fixed income every year, and the rent of 100 pounds of rye per acre is enough for them to be chic. And these Oldenburg nobles will slowly degenerate and even become waste after being corrupted. At that time, they will not be able to pose any threat to Marin. After solving the defense problem of the earldom of Oldenburg, Marin led the army and continued to move eastward. The army first collected ships, built a pontoon bridge on the Weser River, and entered the territory of the Archbishop of Bremen, which is not the same as the Hanseatic League city of Bremen. Although it was very reluctant, the Archbishop of Bremen used force to resist Marin's army of more than 10,000 people, and could only watch them cross the border. Fortunately, Marin's army was strictly disciplined and did not harm the people along the way. Even the 3,000 mercenaries hired by Hamburg did not dare to rob the people along the way under the surveillance of Marin's army, which made the Archbishop of Bremen feel relieved. When more than 10,000 troops arrived at the west bank of the Elbe River, Hamburg on the other side of the river learned the news and sent hundreds of merchant ships to build a huge 3-kilometer-long floating bridge on the wide lower Elbe River, allowing Marin's army to quickly cross the wide river surface of the lower Elbe River and soon arrive at Gluckstadt, the capital of the Principality of Holstein, which is also on the east bank of the Elbe River. In this way, the 10,000 troops brought by Marin from his homeland and the 3,000 mercenaries from Hamburg, together with the other 10,000 troops led by Schwartz and the other 2,000 mercenaries from Hamburg, successfully joined forces in Gluckstadt on the Elbe River. At this time, the total number of this coalition army reached 25,000. If the 5,000 people from Lübeck to Kiel were joined, the total number of the coalition army would reach 30,000. In this era, an army of this size is enough to challenge any country in Europe. Of course, except for the Ottoman Turks who often sent hundreds of thousands of troops. Chapter 80, The Battle of Jutland, Part 1. While the anti-Danish coalition was making good progress on land, the anti-Danish coalition fleet was not idle on the sea. According to the previously agreed strategy, Lübeck would be more conservative for the time being, while the Hamburg fleet and the East Frisian fleet would lure the Danish fleet into a decisive battle. The specific method was that the Hamburg fleet set out from the port of Hamburg with great fanfare, pretending to reinforce Lübeck. Moreover, in order for the Danes to accurately obtain the whereabouts of the Hamburg fleet deliberately moved slowly northward along the west coast of Denmark to lure the Danish fleet to intercept. At the same time, the 40 warships of the East Frisian state would cruise on the sea more than 30 kilometers away from the Hamburg fleet. Once the Hamburg fleet and the Danish interception fleet were found to be engaged in battle, they would immediately go around the side and rear of the Danish fleet to cut off its retreat. Of course, the East Frisian fleet would not immediately engage in battle, but would wait until the fleets of both sides were in a mess and the Danish fleet could not easily evacuate, and then rush out to attack the side and rear of the Danish fleet and intercept any escaping Danish warships. Although it is said that more than 20 kilometers, the telescope can hardly see the distant ships. More than 30 kilometers, it is basically difficult to see even the masts on the opposite side. But Marin thought of a way, which is to let the Hamburg warship set up a beacon on the top of the ship's tower to report to the East Frisian fleet. Even because of the curvature of the Earth, the telescope cannot see the Hamburg fleet 30 kilometers away. But as long as the beacon smoke is lit, the smoke will go straight into the sky, and it can still be seen with a telescope in the distance. For this reason, the Hamburg Parliament specially purchased a batch of wolf dung and fuel with particularly large smoke when concentratedly burned to send signals. After testing, the excavation effect is good. Moreover, both the Hamburg and Lübeck fleets have received instructions from Marin's flag language. Now, the command of the Hamburg fleet is very convenient, and the herald can stand on the bow and wave the flag. Even if the sound of the cannon is heard again, the order can be accurately transmitted on the battlefield. In fact, the flag language technique still needs to be combined with a telescope to achieve the greatest effect. Because, in the case of hundreds of ships, the flag language on the first ship must not be seen by the naked eye by the people on the last ship. In the absence of telescopes, the warships of Hamburg and Lübeck could only rely on flag relay to convey naval battle orders. But in any case, the coalition fleet using flags is much stronger than the Danish navy that does not know flags. In particular, each warship of Marin's fleet is equipped with a telescope, and flag communication is very convenient. The intelligence that the Hamburg fleet sailed along the west coast of Denmark with great fanfare was indeed reported to the Danish intercepting fleet. As a confidant of the Minister of the Navy Thomason, the commander of the Danish fleet, Alkinson, who commanded 120 warships, was not incompetent. At the age of 40, he was also an experienced naval commander. This time, Thomason sent him to lead these 120 Danish warships to completely defeat the Hamburg fleet. As long as the Hamburg fleet is defeated, Lübeck will be alone and it will be easy to deal with. Moreover, in any case, 120 ships against 90 ships is still very advantageous. Although, both the Danish and Hamburg navies are popular with the strategy of hiding soldiers among the people. That is, in wartime, large merchant ships and elite sailors are drawn from merchant ships to join the navy and participate in the battle. However, Denmark is different from Hamburg. Denmark controls the huge Kalmar Union, from Denmark to Norway, and even to the Faroe Islands and Iceland. In order to control these territories, Denmark has long maintained a scale of 50 warships, often patrolling in the waters under its control and clearing pirates. As a small force with only one main city and one secondary port, Cuxhaven, Hamburg has many merchant ships but does not retain a standing fleet. Only in wartime will large ships and elite sailors be drawn from merchant ships to participate in the war. Therefore, in terms of combat readiness, the combat readiness level of the Hamburg Navy is not as good as that of the Danish Navy. To be more specific, most of the soldiers of the Hamburg Navy are part-time. The Danish Navy has 50 warships and a total of 5,000 full-time soldiers. This time, the Danes drew 3,000 people from 5,000 full-time sailors to participate in the siege of the Hamburg fleet. Most of Hamburg's 9,000 sailors were drawn from merchant sailors. There were no more than 500 people with rich experience in naval warfare. In fact, these 500 people were hired by Hamburg from pirates. So, whether in terms of the number of warships or the quality of sailors, Denmark is better than Hamburg. However, no one has considered the fleet of the county of East Frisia. Because Europeans in this era are also very conservative. They value tradition, and no one pays attention to a traditional naval weakling like the county of East Frisia. What's more, the last time the Danes besieged the port of Emden, the county of East Frisia did not send a warship to fight. Therefore, it is normal for European countries to ignore the maritime power of the county of East Frisia. At this time, only Spain, which sold 17 large and small caravels to Marin, knew that Marin still had some strength in his hands. Although Alkinson felt that Hamburg's approach was a bit wrong, out of confidence in the combat effectiveness of the Danish navy, he decisively led a large fleet of 120 warships, bypassing the northern end of the Jutland Peninsula, and heading south along the west coast of the Jutland Peninsula to intercept Hamburg's 90 warships. A few days later, on the day when Marin led his army across the Elbe River, the Danish interception fleet and the Hamburg fleet finally met on the sea 30 kilometers northwest of Esbjerg, the port on the west coast of the Jutland Peninsula. "Quick, light the beacon," Rolf, commander-in-chief of the Hamburg fleet, ordered loudly. After hearing the order, the flag signalman on the side immediately climbed onto the top of the ship's tower and began to wave the two flags in his hands vigorously to convey Rolf's order. Subsequently, the tops of the towers of several large ships with relatively high towers in the Hamburg fleet soon lit up the beacon. Because wolf dung and wet wood that smoked heavily were added, the smoke was very large and went straight into the sky. On the sea 30 kilometers west of the Hamburg fleet, Kidd's adjutant, Vihari, who had been using a telescope on the roof of the flagship Hoffman No. 1, the East Frisian Navy commander-in-chief, soon observed the smoke, and then he shouted, "Lord Kidd, the Hamburgers have lit the beacon. The Hamburgers have lit the beacon." Kidd was taking a nap in the captain's room at this time. It was February, and the sea was windy and still very cold. So he handed the heavy burden of standing on the roof of the ship to blow the wind and observe to his adjutant. As for himself, he hid in the captain's room to avoid the wind. But after hearing Vihari's shout, Kidd immediately rushed out and ordered loudly, "Flag signalman, let all captains come out and wait for instructions." At this time, most captains stayed in the captain's room to avoid the wind. But now that the war is about to start, these guys will naturally come out to command. The flag signalman waved the flags vigorously, and then the captain's adjutants in charge of observation began to call their captains out. When the captains came out in neat clothes, Kidd ordered again, "Tell them that all warships start sailing north for 1 hour, and then east to encircle the Danish fleet." After hearing the order, the flag signalman immediately began to wave the flag and pass on the order. At this time, the Danish fleet and the Hamburg fleet had just met and had not really fought. Therefore, Kidd ordered the fleet to go north first, and then east. Because if the 40 warships of East Frisia went too early and were discovered by the Danish fleet, the other side would most likely choose to fight their own 40 ships first, rather than the Hamburg fleet. After all, you must pick the soft persimmon. Although the East Frisian fleet has a lot of artillery and advanced tactical ideas. However, those naval officers and soldiers are not confident enough. After all, there is no precedent for using artillery to defeat the traditional navy. Therefore, the naval officers and soldiers under Marin are not very confident. If they are discovered by the Danish navy early, causing the Danish navy to rush to the East Frisian navy first, it is easy to collapse because of the lack of confidence in the soldiers. Therefore, these young soldiers who have not experienced a naval battle are better off waiting for the opportunity when the Danish fleet and the Hamburg fleet are in a mess, and then suddenly appear and attack the Danes from behind. Moreover, in order to scare the Danes, Marin also instructed Kidd to fly the flag of Lübeck when entering the battlefield. This is because, according to common sense, Lübeck's fleet should be blocked by the Danish fleet behind. If the Danish fleet attacking the Hamburg fleet finds that 40 Lübeck warships are coming behind them, they may guess is the fleet guarding the Øresund Strait defeated? Otherwise, how could Lübeck's fleet appear behind us? In this way, once the Danish sailors suspect that the defending fleet may be defeated, they will lose confidence, and the morale of the Danish navy will be easily shaken and collapsed. At that time, it will be easier for the East Frisian fleet and the Hamburg fleet to defeat the Danish fleet.